Before the city wakes all the way up, I'm sitting here by the inner harbor, watching the water carry stories the way only Baltimore can. The breeze feels like memory, the sunlight feels like home, and this moment, this quiet moment, reminds me why I tell these stories in the first place. This is the Baltimore that raised some of me. The Baltimore that shaped me a little bit. The Baltimore that still whispers, tell them who we are. So today, from the heart of the harbor, with peace in my spirit and my city all around me, I'm ready to begin. Welcome back to Life, Love, and the Rest of It, the space where we slow down, breathe deep, and tell the truth about who we are, where we come from, and what shaped us along the way. I'm your host, Iris, and today we're going home, not just in memory, but in history, in truth, and lived experience. This episode is called The History of My Hometown, Baltimore. Because before we talk about life, before we talk about love, before we talk about the rest of it, we have to talk about the places that raised us, the streets that shaped us, the neighborhoods that held us, the city that taught us how to stand tall, how to survive, and how to keep our softness in a world that didn't always make room for it. I grew up in Baltimore City, not the postcard version, not the tourist version, but the real Baltimore, the Baltimore behind the headlines, the Baltimore that Brown families built block by block, house by house, generation after generation. And today I want to take you with me through that history. Through my history, through the places I lived, the places that changed, and the places that no longer exist. So settle in, take a breath. Let's walk these streets together. The old ones, the new ones, and the ones that only live in memory now. And this is the story of my hometown. That noise you hear is a boat, the taxi boat pulling up to the side. I was born in Bexley, Georgia, a small southern town with dirt roads, open land, and a slow way of life. But by the time I was about 5 years old, my mother brought us to Maryland, and Baltimore City became the place that shaped some of me. I lived in Baltimore until I was 12 years old, and those 12 years were enough to build some of my foundation. I was raised by my mother. That's the part I know for sure. She was the one who held everything together, the one who moved us from place to place, the one who made sure we had what we needed even when life was shifting under her feet. My father fought in the war. That's the other part I know. I don't know the full story. I was too young. And over the years, I was told different versions. Even now, he still reverts back to those memories, the things he saw, the things he lived through. But the truth is, I don't have the facts, and I won't speak on what I don't know. What I can say is that war changes people, and whatever he carried from that time stayed with him. My childhood, my real day-to-day life was shaped by my mother, by her strength, by her decisions, and by the city we moved through together. And we moved a lot. I grew up all over Baltimore. I remember Whitelock Street. I remember Drew Hill Apartments. I remember Quantico Avenue. I remember Woodburn Avenue. I remember living near the Alameda. I remember Woodland Avenue. And I remember Virginia Avenue. These weren't just addresses. They were chapters. Each one held a different version of me. Each one taught me something about survival, community, and what it meant to grow up brown in Baltimore City during the 1970s and early 80s. And each one of these streets has its own history, a history that shaped the families who lived there long before the city started tearing things down, rebuilding, or letting things fall apart. While my family was moving from street to street, Baltimore itself was moving too, shifting, changing, breaking, rebuilding, and trying to hold itself together. And even though I was a child, I could feel it. I don't have to be grown to sense. You don't have to be grown to sense when the city is going through something. You can feel it in the air, in the schools, in the neighborhoods, in the way adults talk when they think you're not listening. Baltimore in the 1970s and 80s was a city in transition, and not the gentle kind. This was a time when redlining had already done its damage. Black and brown families were pushed into certain neighborhoods and denied loans, denied home ownership, denied the chance to rebuild generational wealth. The neighborhoods we lived in weren't accidents. They were the result of policies that told banks where to invest and where to walk away. And when banks walked away, the city followed. You could see it in the houses that weren't repaired. You could see it in the schools that didn't get resources. You could see it in the playgrounds that rusted. You could see it in the trash that didn't get picked up on time. You could see it in the way some neighborhoods were allowed to fall apart while others were protected. Baltimore was also dealing with the early waves of drug epidemics. First heroin, then cocaine, and later crack. And in the 70s, heroin was already hitting neighborhoods like Park Heights, Penn North, and East Baltimore. Families were trying to hold on while the city struggled to respond. And even though I was young, I remember the feeling, the shift in energy, the way adults whispered, the way kids learned early what to avoid and who to stay away from. At the same time, factories were closing. Baltimore used to be a major industrial city, steel shipping, manufacturing. But by the time I was growing up, those jobs were disappearing. When the factories closed, families lost income. When families lost income, neighborhoods lost stability. And when neighborhoods lost stability, the city changed. Schools were struggling too. Not because the children weren't brilliant, they were. Not because the parents didn't care, they did. But because the system didn't invest in brown neighborhoods the way it invested in others. Schools like Pimlico Elementary were overcrowded, underfunded, and overlooked. Kids were doing their best with what they had. Teachers were doing their best with what they had. But the resources weren't equal, and everybody knew it. And while all of this was happening in the neighborhoods, the city was already planning something big, something shiny, something meant to change Baltimore's image. The early plans for the Inner Harbor redevelop were already in motion. The city was preparing to build a new Baltimore, one that tourists would love, one that looked good on postcards, one that said, "We're a modern city now." But the truth is, the neighborhoods weren't getting that same love. While I was growing up on White Lock, Drew Hill, Quantico, Woodburn, the Alameda, Woodland, and Virginia Avenue, Baltimore was growing up too unevenly, unfairly, and in ways that shaped every brown child who lived through it. This was the Baltimore that raised me, a city that was beautiful and broken at the same time. A city full of community and struggle. A city trying to reinvent itself while families were trying to survive. And even though I was only 12 when we left, those 12 years were enough for me to understand something. Baltimore doesn't just shape you, it marks you. It teaches you how to read people, how to move smart, how to stay aware, how to find joy in small things, and how to carry strength you didn't even know you had. And before we move on, I want to say this: the friendship that shaped me, the girls I grew up with, the people who walked those streets with me, the ones who left a mark on my life, their stories will be in my book. My stories will be in my book, not their stories. Their stories with my stories. Only my experience with them. That part of my journey deserves its own space. But right now, for this episode, we're staying focused on the heart of the city, the Baltimore that raised me. While the neighborhoods I grew up in were dealing with redlining, school equality, drugs creeping into the community, and houses slowly falling apart. The city was working on something else entirely. A new image, a new face, a new Baltimore that didn't look anything like the blocks I lived on. This was the Baltimore they wanted the world to see. The Inner Harbor, the aquarium, the science center, the pavilions, the waterfront restaurants, the brick walkways, the boats, the skyline. All of its designs say, look at us. We're a modern city now. But here's the truth. The harbor wasn't built for the people who lived in the neighborhoods. It was built for tourists. It was built for businesses. It was built for image. But it was also built to bring money into the city. And the contrast was sharp. While families in Park Heights, East Baltimore, and Reservoir Hill were dealing with abandoned houses, underfunded schools, and the early waves of drug epidemics, the city was pouring millions into the Inner Harbor, making it shine, making it sparkle, making it the centerpiece of the Baltimore's new identity. The harbor became the postcard, but the neighborhoods were still the reality. And then there was downtown Baltimore, a story all in its own. If you grew up in the 70s and early 80s, you remember when downtown was alive. Lexington Market was packed. Howard Street had department stores. People caught the bus, shopped, worked, and moved through the city with energy. Downtown was the center of everything, the place you went for school clothes, for food, for errands, for life. But even then, the cracks were starting to show. Stores began closing, businesses moved to the county, the city didn't reinvest in the people who lived there, and slowly downtown shifted from vibrant to struggling, from busy to boarded up, from the heart of the city to a place the city didn't quite know what to do with. And while all of this was happening, the Inner Harbor kept growing, shining, polished, full of attractions. It became the symbol of Baltimore's revival, even though the revival never reached the neighborhoods. So as a brown girl growing up in Baltimore, I learned early that this city had two sides. The Baltimore we lived in and the Baltimore they showed the world. One was real, one was curated, one was home, and one was a performance. And even though I was only 12 when we left, I understood something that took me years to put into words. I can't understand Baltimore by looking at the harbor. You have to understand the neighborhoods. You have to understand the people. You have to understand the history, because the harbor was the city's makeover, but the neighborhoods were the city's truth. When you grow up in a city like Baltimore, you learn early that nothing stays the same. Street change, houses disappear, the whole blocks get wiped out and rebuilt into something you barely recognize. And sometimes the places that shaped your childhood, the places where you laughed, cried, played, learned, and grew, don't exist anymore. Some of the neighborhoods I lived in are still standing. Some are gone, some are frozen in time, stuck between what they were and what the city wants them to become. And that's the part of Baltimore people don't talk about, the quiet grief of losing the places that raised us. I lived on Woodland Avenue back then, 21205. It was a neighborhood full of families, brown families, working families, people trying to make it, kids running up and down the block, neighbors who knew each other, a community that felt alive. But the last time I saw Woodland Avenue around 2020, most of the houses were condemned, boarded up, falling apart, marked for demolition. A neighborhood that once held life and laughter now looked like the city had forgotten it. They have kids over in the wine. I'm over in the area where the wine village is, where they're serving alcohol. They have children over here talking to the children, but I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna finish. But the last time I was on Woodland Avenue, most of the houses were condemned. And then there were Virginia Avenue near Pimlico and Park Heights. That was a predominantly brown neighborhood too. full of families, full of kids, full of community. But like so many parts of Parkeyes, it suffered from decades of neglect. The houses were torn down, cleared out, and new homes or apartments were being built the last time I saw it. I don't know what it looks like today, but the Virginia Avenue I grew up on, the one that shaped me, is gone. And that does something to you. It's one thing to move away from a place. It's another thing for the place itself to disappear. It makes your memories feel heavier. It makes your childhood feel like a ghost. It makes you realize how much of your story lives in buildings that no longer exist. But even with all that, there were places in Baltimore where I actually learned something. Places that poured into me. Places that gave me structure. Places that made me feel like I mattered. I went to Chicopee Middle School, and yes, I might be spelling it wrong, but I remember the school. I remember learning there. I remember teachers who showed up. I never remember teachers bringing us to a wine village in the middle of the day. I remember feeling like I was getting something real. I also went to Mary E. Rodman, and that school stands out in memory because it was one of the few places where I truly felt like I was being educated, not just passed through. Those classrooms gave me something solid to hold on to. And then there was the Mary E. Rodman Community Center, where I was the Girl Scouts. I was in the Girl Scouts from age 11 to 13. My mother was a Brownie leader, and that meant something. It meant leadership. It meant community. It meant seeing Black women organize, teach, guide, and build something for the next generation. Back then, Baltimore had community centers in almost every neighborhood. Real community centers. Not drug centers, not crisis centers, not temporary programs. Actual places for children and families. Places where kids could go after school. Places where we could be safe. Places where we could learn skills, make friends, and stay out of trouble. Places where the community felt alive. But today, it's different. Baltimore once operated over 70 recreation centers across the city. By the early 2010s, that number had dropped to around 35, cut nearly in half. Entire neighborhoods lost their centers. Some were closed
That's a whole
permanently.
person.
Some were
right
handed
there.
over to private groups. Some were simply abandoned. At the same time, the number of drug
A whole
treatment and
person.
recovery centers increased because the city was responding to addiction, overdose, and crisis. Those centers serve a purpose, but they don't replace what children lost. The balance shifted, and the neighborhoods felt it. Where there used to be a rec center on almost every side of town, now there are more recovery centers than youth centers, more crisis services than children's programs, more places to treat trauma than places to prevent it. When I talk about the neighborhoods we lost, I'm not just talking about buildings. I'm talking about history. I'm talking about identity. I'm talking about the places that shaped some of me. The places that shaped so many brown children growing up in Baltimore right now. Some of those houses are still standing. Some are gone. Some are being rebuilt into something new. But the memories don't go away. And even though I left Baltimore 12, those 12 years were enough for me to understand something. When a neighborhood disappears, the people who live there carry the story. We become the archive. We become the history. We become the proof that those places mattered. And when those centers disappeared, when the doors closed, the lights went out, and the city stepped back, other programs tried to step in. Not to replace what we lost, but to keep our children from falling through the cracks. Living classrooms. What stepped in when our centers disappeared? When we talk about the loss of community centers in Baltimore, we're not just talking about buildings. We're talking about the disappearance of structure, safety, mentorship, and places where children could simply be children. But in the middle of that decline, something else was born, not a replacement, but a response to the crisis the city could no longer ignore. Living Classrooms was established in 1985. right in the era where Baltimore's youth programs were collapsing. Factories were closing and drugs were taking over entire blocks. It didn't start as a big nonprofit. It started as a hands-on idea. Use the city, use, use the city itself as a classroom, the harbor, the neighborhoods, the history, the environment, and give young people real skills, real exposure, and real opportunities. As the recreation center shut down one by one, Living Classrooms stepped into the gap with workforce training for teens and adults, after school and summer programs, maritime and environment education, violence prevention and neighborhood-based initiatives, community revitalization projects in East and West Baltimore. They weren't replacing the rec centers we lost. Nothing could replace those. But they were one of the few organizations trying to build something in the middle of the decline. And that matters because when a city removes the places where children grow, learn, and feel safe, the question becomes who steps in, who fills the void, who shows up when the city doesn't. Living Classrooms is one example of a community-driven response to a structural failure. A reminder that even when the city pulls back, the people, the nonprofits, the mentors, the black children still trying to hold the line. But it also raises a harder truth. Why did we need a nonprofit to do what our city once did for free? Why did we have to rely on outside programs to give our children what used to be guaranteed? This is the cost of losing community centers. Not just the empty buildings, but the shift from the public responsibility to private patchwork. And Baltimore's children have been paying the price since 1980s. And then there were the places that didn't serve the whole neighborhood, but still held the neighborhood together in their own way. The Ronald McDonald House on Asquith. The Ronald McDonald House on Asquith wasn't a rec center. It wasn't a youth program. It was something else, a place built around care, stability, and family when everything else in the city felt unstable. For decades, that building stood as a reminder that even in a city where community centers were shutting down, some spaces were still fighting to keep families close, especially during the hardest moments of their lives. Families stayed there when their children were in the hospital. Volunteers cooked meals. People from every part of Baltimore, East, West, County, City, crossed paths in that building because illness doesn't care about zip codes. And for the neighborhoods around it, the Ronald McDonald House was one of the few places that still felt alive. Lights on, people coming and going, a sense of purpose. It wasn't a replacement that the rec centers we lost. Nothing could replace those, but it was one of the last standing symbols of what community support could look like when the city's own structures were falling apart. It showed us that even when the city steps back, compassion doesn't disappear. Sometimes it just moves into different kind of building, and then there were the places that didn't serve the whole neighborhood, but still held the neighborhood together in their own way. Even as the city shut down in the very spaces children once depended on, this building stayed open, not to replace what we lost, but to remind us that care still existed somewhere in the city. It eventually moved to a new, larger location on Green Street in 2019, but for decades, that Asquith building stood as a quiet anchor in a neighborhood that was losing too much, too fast. It showed us that even when the city steps back, compassion doesn't disappear. It just finds a different doorway to walk through. There's something else that happens when community centers disappear. Something quieter, but just as damaging. Children start watching their parents fight to build a life with almost no support behind them. They see their mothers and fathers working hard, trying to stay clean, trying to go back to school, trying to keep home together, trying to break cycles they never asked to be born into. And instead of being celebrated for that, some of them get punished for it. Because in neighborhoods where struggle becomes normal, any sign of progress gets twisted into arrogance. People say, "You think you're better than us. You forgot where you came from. You need to humble yourself." And the children hear that. They hear the whispers. They see the looks. They watch their parents shrink themselves so other people don't feel uncomfortable. What does that teach a child? It teaches them that working hard can make you a target, that being clean and sober can isolate you, that trying to rise can get you pushed back down, that success has a price in communities where pain has become the baseline. And that's the part nobody talks about. When society doesn't give families the resources they need, when the rec centers close, when the support systems disappear, when the pressure shifts onto the people who are trying to do right, they're expected to carry themselves, their children, and sometimes the whole block while almost making sure nobody feels less than in the process. But the truth is simple. A parent trying to do better is not an insult. It's an example. It's a lifeline. It's a blueprint for the next generation. Children deserve to see their parents rise without being told to dim their light. They deserve to learn their growth and not betrayal. And they deserve communities that celebrate progress instead of punishing it. And here's the part that people forget when they judge families who are trying to rise. We are not perfect. We never claim to be. We're just trying to work, trying to stay clean, trying to go to school, trying to raise our children with more stability than we had, trying to break habits we didn't learn in the classroom. We learned them in survival. But in some neighborhoods, the moment you try to do better, people act like you're doing something wrong, like your growth is an insult, like your progress is a threat. And the children see that too. They see their parents fighting for a better life while being told to stay humble, which really means don't rise too far because it makes other people uncomfortable. But here's the truth. Trying to be better does not mean you think you are better. It means you're tired of hurting. It means you're tired of repeating cycles. It means you want your children to see different, see something different. We are not perfect. But we are allowed to grow. We are allowed to heal. We are allowed to change our habits, our circles, our choices, and our future without apologizing for it. And our children deserve to see that. They deserve to learn that progress is not arrogance, that healing is not betrayal, that becoming better for yourself is not the same as thinking you're better than anyone else. Growing up brown in Baltimore was its own kind of education. One that didn't come from books, teachers, or classrooms. It came from the streets, from the people, from the things we saw but didn't fully understand. And let me be honest, as a child, I didn't know Baltimore was drug infested. I didn't have the language for that. I wasn't drug educated. I didn't know what heroin was or what addiction looked like or why certain people moved a certain way. I wasn't imagining it. Baltimore in the late 80s and 90s was hit with multiple overlapping drug epidemics. This was the one that shaped entire neighborhoods. It brought violence, open air drug markets, and rapid community decline. It created the vacancies you remember. It changed how kids walked to school, how parents protected their children, and how neighborhoods functioned. Crack didn't just affect individuals. It affected the structure of communities. Heroin. Baltimore had a heroin problem for decades, long before fentanyl. It was the older generation drug. You saw the nodding, the slow walking, the people who looked struck between worlds. It was common enough that even children knew the signs. This one was different, unpredictable, dangerous, and often frightening to witness. People on PCP could never disconnect from reality. It was known for making people act erratically or aggressively. Kids learn early, stay away from anyone who looks gone. Acid pills, LSD. This wasn't as common in Baltimore neighborhoods as crack or heroin. But it was around, usually tied to parties, older teens, or people experimenting. You heard about it, you saw people try it, but it wasn't the street drug that tore communities apart the way crack did. I grew up in a time when you didn't just hear about drugs, you saw them or you saw people on them. Crack, heroin, angel dust, acid pills, they were right there. Kids my age were being offered things they didn't even understand yet. But I watched what those drugs did to people. I watched what they did to families. And I made a decision early. I wasn't going to be another story the streets could claim. But I knew something was wrong. I knew when I saw people nodding off. I knew when I saw people standing on corners all day. I knew when I saw men in wheelchairs because they had been shot. I knew when somebody got killed because somebody was always getting killed. But as kids, we didn't process it the way adults do. We didn't sit around thinking, the city is dangerous. We just lived our lives. We still stood on the corners waiting for the Asians to fry our wings and fries, what we call the chicken box. We still walked through the neighborhoods to visit friends and family. We still played outside. We still laughed. We still found joy in the middle of chaos. We weren't worried about being shot or killed, not because it wasn't happening. It was. But because children don't carry danger the way adults do. We saw things, but we didn't understand them. We heard things, but we didn't absorb them. We lived in it, but we didn't have the words for it. And that's the part people forget. Children normalize whatever world they're born into. So even though violence was happening around us, we still felt free. We still felt safe in our own way. We still felt like the neighborhood belonged to us. But looking back as an adult, I can see the truth. The same things happening then are still happening now. The same cycles, the same struggles, the same pain, the same survival. We just didn't pay attention to it the way we do now. Growing up brown in Baltimore meant learning how to read people early. It meant knowing when to speak and when to stay quiet. It meant understanding the unspoken rules of the block. It meant being aware without even knowing you were being aware. It meant carrying strength you didn't realize you were building. It meant living in a city that was beautiful and broken at the same time, and somehow finding your place in both. As adults looking at Baltimore today, we can all see the same thing. The city is being rebuilt. Blocks are being cleared. New houses are going up. Neighborhoods that once held generations of black families are being reshaped into something new. And let me be clear, the new housing isn't being built for one ethnicity. It's being built for whoever can afford it. But what I've noticed, and what many people have noticed, is that a lot of the construction workers rebuilding Baltimore aren't American. Many are immigrants. Many are Spanish speaking, and many are part of the labor crews brought in from outside the city. That's not a criticism. That's an observation.
Stay up here.
And it raises a bigger question. Not about ethnicity, but about opportunity. Because when you see entire blocks being rebuilt, you can't help but ask, where are the men from our communities? Where are the American workers? Black, brown, white, who need jobs? Why aren't they the ones rebuilding the neighborhoods they grew up in? And if we look at the research, here's what it tells us. Construction companies hire immigrant labor because it's cheaper and more consistent. Studies show that many contractors prefer immigrant workers because they are willing to work long hours, less likely to quit mid-project, often paid lower wages, less likely to demand benefits. This isn't about race, it's about profit. Baltimore lost a generation of skilled tradespeople. When factories closed and vocational programs were cut, the city lost carpenters, electricians, plumbers, masons, welders, heavy equipment operators. Schools stopped teaching trades. Apprenticeships became harder to access, and entire neighborhoods lost the skills that once kept families working. Many local workers can't get hired without certification. Construction today requires OSHA training, trade licenses, union membership, background checks, drug testing. If people don't have access to training, they can't get the jobs, even if they're willing to work. Some contractors don't trust local labor, and that's a problem. This isn't about truth, it's about perception. Some companies believe local workers won't show up. They won't stay long. They're not trained. They're not dependable. Whether that's fair or not, it affects hiring. Government contracts often go to large companies, not local ones. And those companies bring their own crews. They don't hire from the neighborhood. They don't train local workers. They don't invest in the community. So the question becomes, if the city is being rebuilt, why aren't the people who live here rebuilding it? And that leads to the deeper questions Baltimore residents deserve to ask, openly, honestly, and without being labeled as offensive. Community questions that need answers. Are local workers being overlooked because they lack training or because companies don't want to invest in them? Has the government lost trust in American workers? Did the school system fail to prepare young people for trades? Are apprenticeship programs too limited or too expensive? Are contractors choosing outside labor because it's cheaper and easier? When new homes are built, will the people who lived here all their lives be able to afford them? Is this rebuilding a help out or a push out? Who is the new Baltimore built for? And the biggest question, if the city is being rebuilt, why aren't the people who held it down being hired to rebuild it? These are not angry questions. These are grown woman questions. These are taxpayer questions. These are community questions, because rebuilding is not automatically progress. Rebuilding is only progress when the people who lived through the hard years, the people who survived the decline, are allowed to stay, to work, and to benefit from the change. And that's the heart of it. Is Baltimore being rebuilt for the people who lived it, or for the people who never knew it? As adults looking at Baltimore today, we can all see the same thing. The city is being rebuilt. Blocks are being cleared. New houses are going up. Neighborhoods that once held generations of black families are being reshaped into something new. And let me be clear, the new housing isn't being built for one ethnicity. It's being built for whoever can afford it. But what many of us have noticed is that a lot of the construction workers rebuilding Baltimore aren't American. Many are immigrants. Many are Spanish speaking, and many are part of labor crews brought in from outside the city. That's not a criticism. That's an observation, and it raises a bigger question, not about ethnicity, but about opportunity. Because when you see entire blocks being rebuilt, you can't help but ask, where are the men from our communities? Where are the American workers, black, brown, white, who need jobs? Why aren't they the ones rebuilding the neighborhoods they grew up in? And if we look at the research, here's what it tells us. Contractors hire immigrant labor because it's cheaper and more consistent. Many companies choose immigrant workers because they are willing to work long hours, less likely to quit mid-project, often paid lower wages. Government contracts often go to large companies. In the city, if the city is being rebuilt, why aren't the people who live here rebuilding it? These questions I'm raising, they're not just for me. They're not just for you. They're for all of us. Because one person asking a question sounds like a complaint. But a community asking the same question sounds like a demand for accountability. And I'm not talking about fighting. I'm not talking about anger. I'm talking about standing together in seriousness as adults, as taxpayers, as people who love where they live. Not a gala, not a fundraiser, not a photo op, a real meeting, a real conversation, a real moment where the community shows up and says, we want answers and we're willing to work with you to keep what we're given. Because that's the part people forget. It's not enough to demand resources. We have to be ready to protect them. We have to be ready to maintain them. We have to be ready to show up for them. In the city, if the city gives training programs, we have to enroll. If the city offers apprenticeships, we have to participate. If the city invests in housing, we have to keep the neighborhood safe enough for that investment to stay. If the city opens opportunities, we have to take them seriously. This isn't about blaming the community. This is about shared responsibility. The government has a job. Developers have a job. Contractors have a job. But the community has a job also. And that's why these questions matter. These are not offensive questions. These are grown woman questions. These are community questions. These are Baltimore questions. And the truth is simple. Change only works when the people in the city work together. Not one side, not the other side, both. So yes, we ask the question, we show up, we stand together, we stay serious, we stay consistent, and we stay committed to keeping what we fought for. Because Baltimore can be rebuilt, but the people who lived it deserve to be part of that rebuilding. When I look back at my childhood in Baltimore, I realized there were lessons being taught long before I had the language to understand them. Lessons that didn't come from a classroom. Lessons that didn't come from adults sitting me down and explaining life. Lessons that came from watching, listening, and paying attention. Even when I didn't know that's what I was doing. One of the first lessons I learned was this. I learned not to do drugs. Not because someone lectured me, not because a teacher warned me, not because a program scared me straight. I learned it because I saw what drugs did to people. I saw the faces, I saw the bodies, I saw the way addiction changed a person's walk, their voice, their spirit. And even as a child, without understanding the science, the names, the substance, I knew one thing. I didn't want to look like that. I didn't want to be like them. I didn't want that life. Baltimore taught me that lesson early. Another lesson came from school, and this one stayed with me as an adult. I learned that who teaches our children matters. Because I had teachers who showed up, teachers who cared, teachers who made me feel like I was capable of learning something real. And I also saw the difference when a teacher didn't care, didn't try, or didn't believe in the children in front of them. Baltimore taught me that education just isn't about books. It's about the people who stand in front of the classroom. And then there was the lesson that shaped my adulthood more than anything else. I learned patience, but I also learned to be strong. Growing up in Baltimore meant learning how to read people early. It meant knowing when to stay, when to walk away, and when to protect your peace. It meant recognizing when someone was trying to lure you into something that didn't belong to you, something that could hurt you, trap you, or change the direction of your life. I'm going through that right now. I learned how to walk away from people who didn't know better. I learned how to walk away from situations that weren't safe. I learned how to walk away from choices that would have cost me more than I understood at the time. Baltimore taught me that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes strength is quiet. Sometimes strength is walking away. Sometimes strength is choosing yourself. And as an adult, I can see that these lessons weren't accidents. They were survival skills. They were character building moments. They were the foundation of a woman I am becoming. Baltimore taught me what to avoid, what to value, what to protect, what to walk away from, and what to stand up for. It taught me how to see danger without panicking. It taught me how to see opportunity without being naive. It taught me how to love a city that was both beautiful and broken, and how to carry both truths at the same time. And that's the part that people don't understand. You don't leave a city like Baltimore unchanged. You carry it with you in your instincts, in your strength, in your voice, in your decisions. Baltimore raised me a little bit. Baltimore taught me a little bit. Baltimore shaped me a little bit. And as an adult, I can finally see the lessons for what they were: protection, preparation, and purpose. When I think about the next generation growing up in Baltimore, the children walking the same streets I walk, the teenagers trying to find their way, the young adults trying to figure out who they are, I realized something. I don't want them to learn the way I learned. I want them to learn earlier. I want them to learn safer. I want them to learn with guidance, not survival. Because the lessons Baltimore taught me were real, but they were hard. And if I can help the next generation avoid some of that hardness, then that's what I want to do. I want them to see drugs and say, that's not for me, without having to watch someone fall apart to understand why. I want them to know the truth early, not through fear, but through clarity. I want them to understand that addiction, what addiction does, how it steals, how it changes people, how it breaks families. And I want them to know they deserve better. I want them to have teachers who care, teachers who show up, teachers who teach them respect, teachers who believe in them, teachers that teach them respect for each other. Because I learned early that who teaches our children matters. A good teacher can change a child's confidence. A bad one can break it. And every child in Baltimore deserves someone in their corner. Someone who sees their potential before they see it in themselves. I want them to learn patience, but also strength. I want them to know how to walk away from people who mean them no good. I want them to recognize danger before it becomes a mistake. I want them to understand that walking away is not weakness, it's wisdom. I want them to have opportunities we didn't have. Real training, real apprenticeships, real jobs, real pathways to success, and don't require leaving the city to find a future. I want them to grow up in the neighborhoods that feel safe, not because they're naive and not because the color of their skin, but because the community is strong. I want them to have places to go after school. I want them to have mentors. I want them to have community centers that are open, funded, and alive. I want them to have the things we lost. I want them to know their worth. Not from social media, not from the streets, not from survival, but from the people who raised them, teach them, and love them. I want them to see Baltimore as a place of possibility, not just a struggle, because this city has beauty. This city has culture. This city has strength. This city has history, and this city has children who deserve to inherit something better than what we had. And most of all, I want them to know they are allowed to dream, even if they grew up in a place that taught them to survive first. I want them to know that they can be more than what they see. I want them to know they can break cycles. I want them to know they can build something new. I want them to know they can stay or they can leave, but either way, they can succeed. Because the next generation deserves a Baltimore that doesn't just rebuild buildings, but rebuilds opportunity, rebuilds safety, rebuilds community, rebuilds hope. And if we're going to ask the city to do its part, then we have to do ours too by guiding, protecting, teaching, and loving children who are coming up behind us. They deserve better, they deserve more, and they deserve a future that doesn't look like our past. Before I move on, I need to pause here because this part matters more than people realize. When I was growing up in Baltimore, community centers were everywhere. They were the heartbeat of the neighborhood. They were where children went after school, where families gathered, where leadership was built, where safety lived. But over the years, something happened that changed the entire structure of our communities. When you remove prevention, you increase crisis. And when crisis increases, the city invests in crisis, not children. That's the cycle. And Baltimore has been living in that cycle for decades. So when people ask, why are the neighborhoods struggling? Why are the kids outside? Why are the streets different now? The answer is simple: because the places that once held children together no longer exist. We didn't just lose buildings, we lost structure, guidance, mentorship, safety, and community. And the children growing up today are paying the price for decisions made years ago. This is why the conversation about rebuilding Baltimore matters. This is why the questions matter. This is why the next generation matters. Because if we want safer neighborhoods, stronger families, and better outcomes, we have to rebuild more than houses. We have to rebuild the places that raise children, where to go when you come to Baltimore. If you're coming to Baltimore, whether you're from here, new here, or just passing through, I want you to see the parts of the city that hold beauty, creativity, and community. The places where brown people gather, create, perform, and pour into each other, but where everyone is welcome to sit, listen, and enjoy. Performing arts and live plays. Baltimore has a theater scene that surprises people. It's intimate, it's soulful, and it's rooted in real community. Arena Plays, Upton, one of the oldest continuously operating black theaters in the country. If you want to feel the heartbeat of black artistry, this is where to go. Everyman Theater, downtown. Professional, polished, emotional storytelling. You walk out feeling like you lived the play, not just watched it. Baltimore Center Stage, Mount Vernon, Maryland State Theater, bold productions, new voices and stories that challenge and inspire. Spotlighters Theater, Mount Vernon, small, intimate, in the round, perfect for people who love being close to art. Theater Project, Station North, experimental, dance, spoken word, and boundary-pushing performances. These are the places where Baltimore's creativity lives on stage, not just in history books. Museums and cultural spaces. Baltimore museums tell stories, some heavy, some joyful, all necessary. Reginald F. Lewis Museum, Maryland's African American history, art, and culture, a must visit for anyone who wants to understand the city beyond the headlines. The Walters Art Museum, free, historic, and surprisingly peaceful, a place to slow down and breathe. The Baltimore Museum of Arts, home to the world's largest Matisse collection, but also home to black contemporary artists who deserve the spotlight. Great Blacks in Wax Museum. Everybody know about that place. East Baltimore, a uniquely Baltimore experience, powerful, emotional, unforgettable. Creative Alliance, art performances, workshops, community events, a cultural hub. Baltimore has a quiet but powerful literary scene, especially for black authors and readers. Everyone's Place African Cultural Center, books, culture, wellness, community, a staple for decades. The Ivy Bookshop, author talks, poetry nights, and beautifully curated selections. Greedy Reads, Remington and Fells Point, modern, cozy, and always hosting readings and community events. Urban Reads, bookstores, East Baltimore, black-owned, community-centered, and full of books that speak to our experiences. Tea shops and soft spaces, because sometimes you just want a warm cup, a quiet corner, and a place that feels safe. T-Volve Cafe, Harbor East, black-owned, artsy, and known for open mics, brunch, and community energy. Ceremony Coffee, Mount Vernon and Harbor Point, minimalist, calm, and perfect for reading or writing. Dovecote Cafe, Reservoir Hill, black-owned, community-rooted, and full of love, a space built intentionally for black joy and connection. Couples Tea House, downtown, black-owned, elegant, and centered on wellness and culture. Loose-leaf teas, events, and a vibe that feels like exhaling. So when you come to Baltimore, don't just look for the landmarks. Look for the art. Look for the stories. Look for the places where people gather to create, to heal, to perform, to learn, and to sip something warm while they figure life out. Because this city isn't just history, it's living culture. And there's a seat waiting for you no matter who you are. As I close this episode, I know there will be people who hear everything I said today and ask, who does she think she is? Why should anybody listen to her? And the answer is simple. I'm not a politician. I'm not a celebrity. I'm not a spokesperson for the city. I'm a woman who lived it. I'm a woman who paid attention. I'm a woman who survived the Baltimore they don't put on postcards. And I'm a woman who came back as an adult with clarity, memory, and a voice. I'm speaking because I was there. I'm speaking because I saw it. I'm speaking because I see it. I'm speaking because I learned from it. And I'm speaking because somebody has to say the things we all think but don't always say out loud. Not to divide, not to blame, not to shame, but to tell the truth with love, with intention, and with purpose, because that's what this podcast is. That's what this platform is. That's what this moment is. It's life, it's love, and the rest of it. Life teaches, love stretches, and the rest of it is where we grow into who we are always becoming. It's the quiet lessons, the unspoken truths, the moments that soften us and the moments that sharpen us. It's the laughter we didn't expect, the healing we didn't know we needed, and the clarity that arrives after we finally stop running from ourselves. Life shapes us. Love reveals us. And the rest of it is where we learn to stand in our own story with honesty, with grace, and with a little more courage than we had yesterday. This is where reflection becomes wisdom, where experience becomes intention, where truth becomes legacy. This is life, love, and the rest of it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for holding the space. Thank you for walking through this first chapter with me. I am at the Inner Harbor, and the kids, they just brought the kids down from school, and they're having a winery here on the Inner Harbor right now where my tax dollars paid for it. So I'm sitting at the table where my tax dollars paid for the table until I get finished. And because this episode was kind of long, I'm going to do a part 2. That's where the conversation shifts. That's where I speak directly to the city, not in anger, not in fear, but in truth. Episode 2 is called A Message to the City. And trust me, Baltimore needs to hear it. We're just getting started.